Johnny Carson was once America's king of late night, adored by millions. When he signed off from The Tonight Show in 1992, 50 million people tuned in to watch his final episode. Then he simply disappeared. There were no interviews, no comeback appearances, and barely any trace of public life. It was as if the most famous man on television had vanished. And when he died on January 23, 2005, there was no public memorial service. From the 1980s until his death, Carson lived quietly in his Malibu home, reportedly seeing fewer than 20 people a year outside of his immediate household. This was the same man who had hosted The Tonight Show for 30 years, from 1962 to 1992, during which he interviewed over 7,000 guests and appeared in more than 4,500 episodes. He became the most recognizable face on American television, known for his effortless charm and quick wit. But that public persona may not have reflected who he really was. Those who worked closely with Carson, like his longtime producer Peter LaSalle, began to notice something unusual. Johnny seemed to wear his charm like a mask. When the cameras stopped rolling, his energy drained. He would retreat into himself, delivering flat, monotone sentences and often expressing a desire to be back on his couch at home. Hosting the show, to him, was just a job. One he did well, but one he couldn't wait to leave behind each night. Outside the spotlight, Carson had little interest in socializing. He avoided small talk, rarely engaged with crew members or colleagues, and often chose to spend his time alone, working on crossword puzzles. His isolation wasn't a sudden retreat. It was a gradual return to what he may have always preferred: solitude. Talking to fans was never something Johnny Carson welcomed. In fact, he was so determined to avoid interactions with the public that he had NBC construct a private exit just for him. Each night, he would return to the studio, do his show, and leave through that exit, avoiding people as much as possible. This became a strict routine, and anything that disrupted it was seen as an inconvenience. When invitations to industry events came in, Johnny treated them like chores. He avoided most and begrudgingly attended a few, maybe 12 a year, while his rival Merv Griffin showed up to over 45 annually. Johnny had a ready excuse for skipping Hollywood parties. He claimed they were for extroverts and said he preferred going home to talk to his dog, not even his wife. It raises the question, did this tendency to isolate himself emotionally contribute to his 4 marriages ending? Was his need for solitude, his rejection of intimacy and connection, part of what pushed people away? His daily life was quiet and predictable. He played tennis alone. He read Astronomy magazine. He made short, business-like calls to Jay Leno just to swap jokes. Even when he had visitors, like director Howard Smith, he kept things distant. After a short conversation, he would ask them to sit in silence and watch the stars with him. Smith claimed Johnny was content. But was that real contentment? Or was he just hiding from something deeper? Johnny always preferred to eat dinner at home. Despite frequent invitations, he almost never went out. His 4th wife, Alexis Mass, recalled their dinners as peaceful, private affairs. No guests unless it was family. She believed Johnny thrived in that silence. But was it peace or selfishness? Instead of engaging with her, he would read, play tennis, or stare at the ocean. The emotional needs of those around him often seemed like an afterthought. Yet this same man quietly donated millions of dollars to charitable causes, with no publicity or desire for praise. He wrote checks to strangers in need. So how could someone so generous to the world be so emotionally distant from his own wife? This pattern didn't stop with his marriages. It was rooted deep in who Johnny was, even as a child. Growing up, Johnny was different from the other kids in his Iowa neighborhood. While others played baseball or ran through cornfields, he stayed inside practicing card tricks from a magic kit he'd begged for through the mail. At 14, social interactions gave him such intense anxiety that he would hide behind the family's upright piano whenever guests came over. He'd crouch there in silence, shuffling cards in the shadows, desperate not to be seen. Because if he drew too much attention and didn't behave perfectly, he'd risk getting in trouble. His mother, Ruth, made sure of that. She expected absolute perfection from her children, but believed Johnny was incapable of it. She didn't think much of him as a boy, considered him dirty, and made sure he knew it. She didn't behave like a nurturing mother, but more like a strict, joyless commander. Ruth wasn't just demanding, she was cold, critical, and emotionally distant. And Johnny, long before he was famous, learned to retreat into himself to survive. In Johnny Carson's childhood home, affection was a form of currency, rare and tightly controlled. His mother, Ruth, was especially stingy with it. Compliments and warmth had to be earned, and even then, they were scarce. As he rose to fame and became one of America's most beloved late-night hosts, there were reports that Ruth continued to ridicule him, never offering the approval he longed for. Could those reports have been true? Did she really resent her own son? As a boy, Johnny practiced magic tricks obsessively. When he finally got his hands on a deck of cards, he followed family members around the house, pleading with them to pick a card. He was shy, but something about performing gave him a sense of purpose. To his surprise, Ruth supported his early efforts, at least once. She made him a cape for his first performance in front of the local Kiwanis Club. At 14, he debuted as the Great Carsoni and earned $3 a show. On stage, he felt something he never felt at home: warmth. The audience loved him. It was a kind of love that didn't come with conditions or criticism. It felt safe. But the coldness at home never went away. When Ruth died in October 1985 at the age of 84, Johnny didn't mourn. To friends, he said simply, "The wicked witch is dead." He refused to attend her funeral. Then something unexpected happened. While going through her belongings, Johnny discovered a box in her home, filled with clippings from every stage of his career. Articles, reviews, interviews, meticulously saved. The same woman who never openly showed pride had quietly tracked his success for decades. She had been his biggest fan in secret. Johnny took that box and kept it in his bedroom closet for the rest of his life. Did he regret not going to her funeral? Could he have forgiven her in that moment? That discovery may have complicated everything he thought he knew about her. But the damage was already done. Growing up in an emotionally dysfunctional environment warped Johnny's ability to connect with people. It was easier to avoid them entirely than to risk rejection, criticism, or failure. But deep down, he still craved love. He loved the feeling of making people laugh, of being appreciated for what he could do. Johnny had once dreamed of being a magician. Some say Ruth tried to crush that dream, though her secret scrapbook casts doubt on that. Maybe she discouraged him at first, then changed her mind. Or maybe she just didn't like the idea of a magician, but was fine with his pursuit of entertainment once it became respectable. The truth is unclear. While serving in the U.S. Navy, Johnny discovered another side of himself. Despite his quiet nature, he was physically capable and mentally sharp. He became an amateur boxer, winning 15 of his 16 matches. He was even approached by U.S. Secretary of the Navy James V. Forrestal, who asked if he wanted to stay in the Navy. Johnny declined and said he wanted to be a magician instead. Forrestal was reportedly so surprised he asked Johnny to perform a trick for him. And Johnny delivered, not just a wish, but a real performance. He didn't just dream about entertaining people. He had the skills, the charm, and the quiet hunger to be seen, on his own terms. After entertaining someone as stern and sophisticated as Secretary Forrestal, Johnny Carson realized something powerful. If he could make him laugh, he could make anyone laugh. That moment gave him a boost of confidence and clarity. But instead of continuing down the path of becoming a magician, Johnny changed direction. He decided to become a comedy writer. It made sense. Writing allowed him to entertain without having to face people directly. So, when he enrolled at the University of Nebraska in 1946, he chose to major in journalism. But that plan didn't last long. A few months in, Johnny switched his major to speech and drama. What changed? He had been performing magic for money, earning about $25 per show, and he realized that performing, not just writing, gave him the kind of emotional reward he was chasing. Radio, he thought, was the perfect middle ground. It allowed him to perform without being seen, to be present without being fully exposed. By 1949, he graduated from college, though not as a radio performer. Still, his background in speech and drama, along with his journalistic instincts, became the foundation for his future career. He struggled for a while, but after years of persistence, Johnny landed The Tonight Show in 1962. It may seem strange that someone so shy and introverted would choose to be a late-night host. But for Johnny, the answer was rooted in childhood. On stage and on camera, he received the love and warmth he had long been denied. The audience became a kind of emotional substitute, offering him the validation his mother never gave. He was hooked on that feeling, but he couldn't or wouldn't seek that love in his personal life. His relationships with the women he married were distant and strained. Even with his 3 sons from his first marriage, Johnny was emotionally unavailable. Just like his own mother, he showed them little warmth. He became the very thing he had once resented, not because he didn't care, but perhaps because he didn't know how to show that he did. His failures as a father and husband were part of the reason he later withdrew from the public eye. There was another layer to his choice of career. The Tonight Show gave Johnny a controlled environment. The conversations were scripted, the laughs were expected, and the risks were low. It was therapy disguised as entertainment. He could connect with people on his terms without truly being vulnerable. He had found a way to be surrounded by people while keeping his emotional distance. But over time, even that illusion started to crumble. The show that once helped him cope with his trauma began to take a toll. Fame brought constant attention, and fans didn't respect the privacy he desperately craved. The cameras were fine, he knew how to perform for them, but once they were off, he wanted to disappear. The contradiction between his public persona and private self became harder to manage. Eventually, Johnny made the decision to walk away. He had always planned to retreat when the time was right. The fame that once fed him had started to rob him of the peace he valued most. What many didn't understand is that almost every decision Johnny made, his silence, his distance, even his charm, was shaped by the difficult childhood he never truly escaped. A childhood he likely spent his whole life trying to forget. Johnny Carson's isolation in his final years wasn't just about his personality or past trauma. It was also about something far more physical. He was sick, and he wanted to keep that part of his life hidden from the world. In September 2002, only 2 years before his death, his representative insisted to the media that Johnny was in good health. Even Johnny himself told CBS News. He was fine, despite growing speculation from tabloids. But the truth was he wasn't fine, and he knew it. His illness wasn't just something that happened to him. It was something he brought upon himself. Smoking had been a constant in his life for decades. While it's unclear when exactly he started, by the 1960s, Johnny was rarely seen without a cigarette. He smoked everywhere, backstage, in meetings, even live on television. At the time, it was legal, and Johnny took full advantage. Or perhaps more accurately, he was consumed by it. NBC's archives revealed just how extreme his smoking habit was. He reportedly smoked between 40 and 60 cigarettes a day. That's up to 3 full packs daily, especially during the high-stress hours of taping The Tonight Show. Between monologues and commercial breaks, he was chain-smoking, even as his lungs were breaking down. To millions of Americans, it may have looked cool or casual, but behind the scenes, the damage was mounting. His chronic cough eventually became part of who he was. Doctors warned him to quit, and he tried, but addiction is rarely that simple. He admitted to close friends that the cigarettes were killing him, and yet he kept smoking. He felt guilty, ashamed, and trapped. By the late 1970s, he publicly acknowledged that he should have sought help to quit, but he didn't. And over time, his lungs began to deteriorate. His lung capacity shrank. At one point, it was down to 60%. Crowds made him feel suffocated. He would run out of breath just from being in busy rooms. Stairs became unbearable. Elevators triggered panic. Something was clearly wrong, and in 1991, doctors gave it a name, emphysema. Now, his early retirement from The Tonight Show in 1992 suddenly made more sense. Fans were shocked at the time. Many felt he still had more to give. But Johnny knew what they didn't. His health was failing. He didn't want to stay on air only to one day lose control. Gasping for air between punchlines, struggling under the hot lights, slowly falling apart in front of millions. He left while he still had some dignity. That same fear shaped his behavior off camera. It's likely why he avoided parties and public events. Crowds weren't just uncomfortable, they were dangerous. He didn't want people to see him breathless, coughing, or weak. He didn't want to be pitied, but even after retiring, his condition worsened. By 1993, walking even 100 yards left him severely short of breath. By 2004, his lung function had dropped to just 35 to 40%. At that level, most people rely on supplemental oxygen just to sit comfortably, let alone move around. But Johnny reportedly refused it. Whether it was denial, pride, or a desire for privacy, he chose to endure the decline on his own terms. So, in his final years, Johnny Carson withdrew not just from the public, but from the world. The man who once brought laughter to millions now lived quietly, facing the consequences of a life lived in public, but often at the cost of his own health and emotional well-being. Johnny Carson's refusal to stop smoking, even as his health deteriorated, reveals a deeper struggle, likely tied to his complex, painful past. Despite a terrifying health incident in 1995, which should have been a wake-up call, Johnny continued smoking. His addiction, paired with a deep-seated reluctance to be seen as weak, may have been driven by his childhood traumas. Perhaps the fear of vulnerability, born from years of emotional neglect, led him to avoid confronting his weaknesses, even when his body was begging for help. Between 1999 and 2002, Johnny was hospitalized several times for heart attacks and pneumonia complications, but it only got worse. By 2004, he required constant oxygen therapy, 24/7. That meant he was hooked up to tubes all day, constantly aware of his failing health and the limitations it imposed on every moment of his life. Still, Johnny kept up the facade that he was fine, unwilling to publicly acknowledge the reality of his condition. When he admitted, "I'm on borrowed time," he knew his end was near. On January 23, 2005, Johnny Carson passed away at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles from respiratory failure caused by emphysema. His addiction to smoking, something he hated yet couldn't quit, had finally claimed him. But did he secretly want the disease to take him? Was he no longer interested in living by the time he was diagnosed? Or did he simply want to be done with the pain and guilt that had haunted him for so long? Johnny's troubled past was defined by loss after loss. He experienced so much heartache that living for him must have seemed more like a burden than a gift. He had married his college sweetheart, Joan Walcott, in 1949, and they had 3 sons together. For a while, it seemed like life couldn't be better. But with fame came destruction. After 14 years, their marriage ended in divorce, and Johnny confessed that he had cheated on Joan and was obsessed with his work. The divorce not only ended his marriage, but also caused a rift with his sons, one he never fully repaired. His second marriage to model Joanne Copeland ended after 9 years. Joanne accused him of emotional neglect and workaholism. The public nature of their divorce was painful, and it cost Johnny $500,000. However, this was just the beginning of a much steeper emotional toll. Johnny's third marriage to socialite Joanna Holland in 1972 was even more turbulent. The clash between their lifestyles, her high society world, and his preference for solitude, created a volatile environment. Their divorce in 1985 nearly bankrupted Johnny, costing him over $20 million in settlements. Yet despite these painful lessons, Johnny remarried again in 1987. His fourth wife, Alexis Mass, was 26 years younger and fiercely private, a stark contrast to his previous spouses. Despite this, Johnny's inability to emotionally connect with her remained a pattern. He would read or play tennis rather than communicate with her, and this distance only deepened after an unspeakable loss. In 1991, Johnny's life was shattered by the death of his son Rick in a car accident. Rick's death was a crushing blow, one Johnny never fully recovered from. He mourned for weeks, carrying the weight of guilt for not being closer to his sons, the very thing he feared most after a lifetime of isolation. But the heartbreak didn't end there. In 1995, Johnny's eldest son, Christopher, died from lung cancer, likely as a result of the same smoking habits Johnny had passed down. How could Johnny process that? How could he wake up every day knowing that the very behavior that had destroyed him was now responsible for taking his son's life? Even more devastating, Johnny's relationship with his youngest son, Corey, had become so estranged that they rarely spoke in his final years. Through all his fame, Johnny had everything except what he needed most: genuine human connection. The sense of fulfillment he might have hoped for through his career never materialized. As he lost his sons, Johnny began to question the meaning of it all. "What's the point of all this?" he would ask, feeling the weight of his own survival outlive his children. The fame, the fortune, the accolades, it all seemed meaningless in the face of such personal loss. In the end, the one thing Johnny couldn't escape was the loneliness that had shaped so much of his life.